So welcome. This is a follow-up webinar from our conversation at Dominate Your Market around Predictably Irrational, one of my favorite books and by one of my favorite authors, Dan Ariely, and just a brilliant, brilliant book. And what I wanted to do is just spend a few minutes and talk about some of the insights out of this book. To set it up properly, there's a couple questions we have to first ask ourselves. First and foremost, why does the pricing of the services you provide through your law firm matter so much? Like, why are they important? And what is the thinking behind your current pricing strategies, if any? In the book, Predictably Irrational, really opens up a lot of thinking for me and gave me a common vocabulary and common denominator to communicate with a lot of people and Dominate Your Market about pricing strategies, how we're pricing, and how pricing, whether your pricing matters. And pricing does a lot of things for you. Some of the things we talked about in the workshop is pricing helps people self-select. Pricing says the type of service you're going to provide. Pricing sometimes provides exclusivity. Pricing drives your profitability. Pricing helps you separate good clients from bad clients. So pricing is really kind of the internal and external mechanism to help you communicate the value that you provide to your clients. So there's so many different ways that pricing impacts your practice. And my experience is that most of us, once we kind of set our fees and set our pricing, never really think about it again. One of the things I did to help people think about pricing is I developed this model called the Increased Profitability Cycle. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the model. It's up on your screen now. But these are basically strategies that I've used with law firms to help them increase their profitability. And on the far left of the screen, you'll see pricing strategies. And we could probably spend a day to 2 days just talking about pricing strategies around law firms. The cash flow focuser, which is a classic concept I've been teaching for 15 years. And if you're not familiar with this concept, let us know. We'll help you with it and help you get some clarity around it. The third one is improving your marketing pipeline, which is how do you upgrade your referral sources. The next one is speed of collections. How quickly do you get paid and how do you get paid? Now, for some of the firms that get paid up front, speed of collection is pretty darn good. But for a lot of lawyers, they don't get paid up front. So the question is, how do you get paid more quickly, more effectively through your pricing strategies? Then, of course, it's the client enhancement process, upgrading your clients over time. And then the other way that you can make your profitability improve is speed of production, which is basically your time on desk, getting work from point A to point B from the time you're hired to complete it. How can you accelerate your speed of production by 10%, 20%, or maybe by 50%? What can you do to get that work more effectively off the desk and complete it? Leverage of team. How do you use your team so that it's a more profitable process for you? Team bonus models and attorney compensation models. I really, you have to respect that attorney compensation models and team bonus models alter and change behaviors within certain law firms. So all of these are different profitability strategies that can constantly be improved over time. All we're going to do today as a tip of the iceberg conversation is talk about some pricing strategies and starting to open up the conversation around pricing. And that's all I want to do is I just want to focus on pricing. So the question becomes, especially for the participants in Dominate Your Market, how do you increase your prices on your services when you are already perceived as the most expensive in your market? Especially when most of the lawyers in the Dominate Your Market program perceive themselves in the upper 5 to 10% from a price point perspective. And a lot of the strategies talked about in Predictably Irrational, whether they were directly on point, were ideas that could help us think about this particular question. So I want to walk through a couple ideas that I thought were very valuable. The first idea number one, is this concept called arbitrary coherence. And the idea is that although initial prices may be arbitrary or made up, might be a better way of looking at it, once those prices are established in our minds, they will then shape the notion of our current prices and future prices. And the example he talked about was the black pearl story, where black pearls were considered garbage and of no real value, the Pearl King at the time, and I can't remember his name from the book, created a whole exclusivity around them, a marketing campaign around them, and said, look, they're rarer than white pearls, therefore they should be more valuable. And once he established an arbitrary price, then all the pricing around the black pearl rotated based on the arbitrary price. Now, how does that relate to lawyers? Well, in my experience, we are the kings and queens of arbitrary coherence. If I ask a lawyer what their hourly rate is, they'll say, $400 an hour. And I'll say, well, where did you get that from? Like, what was the benchmark for that? And they'll say, well, I talked to so-and-so, and that's what he's charging. And I talked to so-and-so, and that's what they're charging. And ultimately, if you think about it, it's the greatest example of arbitrary coherence because some lawyer made up an hourly rate, and all the other lawyers are thinking about their hourly rate prices as it relates to that lawyer's hourly rate prices. And quite frankly, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just arbitrarily made up, and everything seems to rotate around that. So if you start to think about that, most law firms are operating off of this premise of arbitrary coherence of their pricing with no real thought process beyond one person made it up, and that became the anchor for the rest of the lawyers in that marketplace or in the industry to rotate around. So that's the first idea, arbitrary coherence. Idea number two, one of my favorite conversations in pricing strategies, which is establishing pricing context. The point is just don't offer one thing. Create a buying context. And the problem is the way that you want to think about this, and the example I used in class, and was one that I think everybody can relate to, is let's say you have a client that wants a simple will. If they walk in the office and say, I want a simple will, and you say a simple will is going to be $100, and you're just offering them one thing, well, the clients don't have an internal value meter. They don't know the difference between a $100 will or a $1,000 will. They don't know whether $100 is fair or not. It just sounds expensive. So if you want to help them make a buying decision, you have to help them understand what is expensive or cheap. You have to give them a pricing context, something to compare them to. And the example that we used in the class was Starbucks. And Starbucks is probably the greatest pricing context that people will recognize. And if you're watching this on your screen, you'll see that we have a tall, a venti, and grande Starbucks. Now, the two things about pricing context which are totally intriguing is if you give people the choice between the tall, the medium, and the grande, or the tall, venti, grande, I guess. Grande, venti. I'll make sure I get that right. Tall, grande, venti. Which basically for the non-Starbucks fans is small, medium, and large. If you look at the buying context, and you ask people, where do Starbucks make most of their money? And people go all over the place on this. They go, well, they make most of their money on the larger because it's bigger, or they make more money on their small because they charge so much. No, most of the people order the medium, the grande. So Starbucks makes sure that the pricing on the venti and on the tall, the large and the small, makes the medium look like a deal. So the truth is that the small and the large are more than likely a pricing decoy because most of the people are going to be psychologically more inclined to buy the medium. Now, of course, some people buy the tall and some people buy the large, and that doesn't matter. The bulk of the pricing strategy is that more than likely people will buy the medium. So make sure that your medium price or your medium offer is your most profitable offer. So that's one example of a pricing context. The second idea or strategy is to use a decoy. And the description that we had from Predictably Irrational was Dan Irely's example of the use of the Economist. And this is a great example, and it's just a lot of fun. Because if you look at the screen, Dan tripped over an ad for the Economist magazine, and it gave three options. One option was the Economist for $59, which, well, $59 for a year subscription, well, okay. Then you look at the next option, and that's $59 for an online subscription. The next option is $125 for the print subscription. Well, that's a little bit more than twice the online subscription. And then you have the print and web subscription. Well, that's a deal. You get print and web for the same price, $125, as you would get the online and print subscription. Totally fascinating. And so if someone doesn't know what they're doing, I should say someone doesn't appreciate pricing strategies, they'll say, well, gosh, the deal here is the print and web subscription. Well, if you look at it a little bit more, it's clearly that the print and web subscription are the same price, so the print and web, same price as the print subscription, therefore the print and web look like a better deal. Well, Dan was totally fascinated with this and did a study. He basically gave people the option of the Economist with the three options, the initial ad that you saw with the $59 online, the $125 print subscription, and the $125 print and web subscription. What he discovered was 84% of the people chose the print and web subscription consistently, and 16% chose the online subscription. So when people had a choice between the print and web and print, if they compared the deal, print and web was really the better deal. So clearly, if we look at that, the print is a decoy, meaning the middle offer here, the way this is structured, is a decoy. It's designed to make you think that the print and web subscription is a better deal. So Dan took out, in an ad that he created, he took out the print subscription for $125 and gave people two options: the online subscription for $59 or the print and web for $125, and he took out the decoy. Well, the numbers changed radically. What happened is that the subscription for the online went through the roof. 68% chose to the online, and the print and web subscription dropped by more than half. It would drop to 32%. So all he did was take the decoy out, and once the decoy came out, the big revenue driver, the print and web subscription, dropped by more than half. So it's a great example of setting up a decoy inside an offer to see what people do. Now, my suggestion for those of you that are intrigued by this is that one of the great strategies you can do is that when you're offering something to clients, and we walked through a lot of different examples of this at the workshop, was to make sure that if you do a decoy, use a deluxe decoy. And the two decoys that we talked about, or I should say two examples we talked about in the workshop, was the Williams and Sonoma bread maker problem. Williams and Sonoma was one of the first companies to roll out a bread maker. And I think they called it the home baker or something like that. And they had it priced for like $150. And they couldn't sell it. I mean, the example in the book, they just couldn't seem to move it, and they didn't know what to do. So they hired a marketing company that came in and came up with a very, very unusual strategy, which was to roll out a deluxe model. And I think the deluxe model was around $185, and the base model was $125. So people would look at that and go, wow, I don't think I want to spend the money on a deluxe bread maker, but I'll try the basic, because if I like the basic, I always can come back and buy the deluxe. But once they put the deluxe out there, the basics literally started flying off the shelves. They were moving these things very, very quickly because people had something to compare it to. The really expensive one made the one they wanted to sell look like a deal. My favorite, I think, is the story of Wendy's Hamburgers. When Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's Hamburgers, was growing his, Wendy's restaurant chain, he had two hamburgers. One was the single, and the second was the double. Well, he couldn't quite figure out why the double only sold less than 1%. He was like, pricing-wise, it was a better deal. It was a really good hamburger. He just couldn't figure it out. So he hired this marketing company, consulting company, and they came back and said, well, the problem is, Dave, that people, and they studied a lot of customers and asked them, why do you want to buy the double? And generally across the board, people said they didn't want to get the double because they didn't want anyone to think they were gluttons. Because who would eat a double, hamburger like that? I mean, that's just, gluttony at its best. So Dave came up with a strategy which was very unique. He came up with the triple. And people would now come in and they walk in and they look and they go, wow, A triple, that's really, really gluttony. The double I can live with, but the triple, no, 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 not so much. And the double now is the best-selling hamburger at Wendy's. And all the change was a offering of a triple, giving people a deluxe choice, giving people a pricing context between the three to choose from. And just like with Starbucks, we find that more people will choose the middle when they give an option between a small, medium, large. In this case, between a single, a double, and a triple, more people typically trend towards the double. So it's pretty intriguing. So if you start to think about this, you start to ask yourself in your practice, what could your deluxe be? What's your deluxe decoy? Idea 5 is there's a couple there's 3 strategies I want to point out when you start to experiment this with your pricing context. Number 1, know what your most profitable option is and design your context around it. So whatever you think your sweet spot is, whatever your firm makes a lot of money on and is not dependent on you, that probably is more likely what you want to design your pricing context around. So you want to make sure that might be your medium offer. Number 2, make sure your deluxe offer has a deluxe price. I see this mistake all the time. I've made this mistake not once but a couple of times. And I really think that if you have a deluxe, let's just say for fun purposes, that I have a simple will, no frills for $100, a simple will with the option of meeting with one of the lawyers and a follow-up call and a specialty audio DVD for $150. If I say, okay, we're going to give you the deluxe will, which is going to be $175, and it includes this extra special meeting with the lawyer at the end of the year to review your estate planning to make sure nothing's changed, and the lawyer's cell phone number, most of the people will choose option 3 because it's not expensive enough. A $25 marginal difference is not expensive. It may be that you have to triple it or double that price on the deluxe, so people look at it and go, that's a really cool offer, but it's really, really 2 to 3 times the price of the middle one. I think I'll go with the middle one. So you want to make sure that when you price whatever your deluxe is, it has a deluxe price. Don't give a marginally different price, because people will buy it. In my experience, in my practice, I'm still surprised that people will buy our deluxe offer. 2 or 3 times a year, somebody would take a swing at the deluxe because they're deluxe kind of people. And deluxe people are out there running loose. Why not design a pricing option for them? But the bulk of your clients are going right towards the middle. So you want to make sure that you have your most profitable option as the key centerpiece of your pricing context. Third, and this is a really big one, make sure that your offers are comparable. And this is directly out of the book, and I'm going to read it. We not only tend to compare things with one another, but also tend to focus on comparing things that are easily comparable and to avoid things that cannot be compared easily. So what is Dan saying in that awkward sentence? He's saying, look, if you're going to compare apples, then compare a small apple, a medium apple, and a large apple. Don't compare a banana, a pineapple, and a watermelon. Those are not easily compared. So what I mean by that, when I was doing my will example, don't do a will, a living trust, and an offshore trust in the same pricing context. They're not easily comparable. If you're helping somebody get a divorce, don't do don't do a deluxe divorce where you have this lawyer's cell phone, a uncontested divorce, and a divorce with a mediation as the cap on the price and capping on the pricing, because they're not easily comparable. They're too hard for the client to compare. So you want to think through that whatever the client is comparing is something that's going to be apple to apple, not apple, banana, pineapple. They got to be similar services. Otherwise, the clients get very, very confused and they can't compare them. If they can't compare them, then they can't make a decision on which one's the best for them. And they'll say something like, no, I want to think about it, I don't get it, and you don't realize it, but your pricing context is what caused the confusion. Now, the example that I chose, and I don't even know if she's aware of it, is I gave a great example of a pricing context. I downloaded the wonderful pricing context that was created for Jan Copley and her law firm. Jan Copley, who was a coach for us for a period of time, and I think she did a terrific job in designing what I'd say a great basic stage 1 pricing context. So I gave you the example of her so you could look at it, you could feel for how she did it. So my suggestion is that you just take a step back and say, you know, what kind of pricing context can I create in my law firm? It doesn't have to be extraordinary, it just has to be a first draft, something that you can think about and start to process and wrap your brain around. And bring it back to the homework we gave everybody was to bring it back to the next workshop so we could talk about it and see what you have. Now, if you have total confidence that you have a great pricing context, take it for a test drive and see what happens in front of your clients. It's really up to you how you want to do that. With that being said, I don't want to spend too much more time on this. I want just to be an introductory overview of pricing context out of the book Predictably Irrational. I hope you found this webinar useful and practical, and thank you for listening.